A great number of oblique and covert references can be found throughout Layers of Fear. This is the full account of what happened to the painter, including how he fell from grace. The narrative of Layers of Fear is revealed in discrete chunks that are frequently fragmented and oblique. The tragic story of the painter and his family can only be pieced together if the player collects as many artifacts as possible and pays close attention to the connections between them. Even if the player completes the game in its entirety, very little of the story is actually explained to them. Even after the conclusion of the story, you will most likely still have questions regarding the activities that took place throughout the painter's life. We have pieced together the most comprehensive version of the character's biography using the hints that have been hidden throughout the game. The painter, an American painter who worked during the 1920s and 1930s but whose identity is never revealed at any point in the game, worked during those decades. There's not a lot of information available about his past before he was married, but the game makes it seem like he had an abusive and drunken father when he was growing up. The painter, when he was a younger man, served his country in the First World War, when he was wounded in combat and lost the lower portion of his leg. For the remainder of his life, he walked with the assistance of a cane and a wooden prosthetic. After returning from the war, the painter established his reputation in the art world through the creation of portraits, which he eventually displayed at the gallery of Thomas Caldwell, who would go on to become both his agent and his closest friend. The painter achieved a degree of popularity and notoriety that was middle of the road, and it was during this time that he met the musician, who was a stunning virtuoso on the piano and violin, and whose work was in high demand. During the course of working together on an exhibition that combined music and visual art, the two ended up falling in love and eventually being married. The painter and the musician were both branded by the Rat Queen, a supernatural entity who is said to be responsible for pushing creative people to the pinnacle of their abilities, while also driving them onto a path of self-destruction. The musician's family had exerted a great deal of pressure on her during her whole childhood, in order to encourage the development of her ability. And the Rat Queen had encouraged the musician's feelings of bitterness and perfectionism. The musician was determined to become a world-renowned soloist, while simultaneously being the ideal wife and mother. The painter, on the other hand, was aware of the fact that his wife was a talented musician, but he refused to acknowledge the fact that she was more talented than he would ever be as an artist. He would undermine their collaborations in order to prevent the audience's attention from drifting too far to the musician's music, and he insisted that the musician adhere to the traditional gender roles by working as a homemaker, while he was free to work in his studio without interruptions. Although she never directly confronted either of her victims, the Rat Queen is present as a malevolent force in each and every one of the stories told in Layers of Fear. The couple's first child was a daughter, and she was born not long after the wedding. The difficulties of fatherhood intensified the tensions between the two artists, and the painter in particular began to act out as a result of their growing frustrations with one another. For instance, the musician suggested that the family purchase a cat so that the growing toddler would have a playmate, but the painter went and bought a Doberman instead. Despite the fact that the painter was aware that the Doberman was vicious and poorly trained. Not only did the enormous dog scare the child, but the painter took very responsibility for it, and in the end, he saw it as just another annoyance and diversion from his work as an artist. When they were around other people, the couple put on a mask of a loving, happy young couple, to give the impression that their problems, which neither of them had fully acknowledged up to this point, did not exist. However, after only a few years, the musician's career came to a sudden and permanent stop. She was shopping at the newly opened Galactic department store when it caught fire due to poor electrical wiring. The musician was able to survive the accident, but she was burned across her entire body and sustained severe nerve and muscle damage. The musician would never be able to play an instrument again because she had lost the ability to move 3 of her fingers on her right hand, and she also suffered from spasms and was in constant discomfort. Both she and her husband refused to acknowledge this fact, persuading themselves, despite the findings of 16 separate medical professionals, that her disfiguring scars and her newly acquired disability could be treated. On the surface, the painter admitted that he would need to make some sacrifices in order to take care of the musician, while also shouldering a far greater portion of the responsibility for the upbringing of their daughter. Despite this, he continued to shut himself up in his workshop for hours at a time, resenting the new duties he had for pulling others away from his artistic pursuits. In addition, he did not give in to the pleadings of his wife to switch the gas lights and candles in their home over to electric lighting, After all, she was extremely afraid of fires at this point. Even after installing electric lights, the painter would still insist on painting by candlelight in a room full of oil paints despite the musician's complaints. This would happen despite the fact that the room was filled with oil paints. At the same time, the world of art was undergoing significant shifts. For example, the ascendance of new movements such as Cubism meant that realistic portraiture fell out of favor. Because they were unable to sell as many paintings and did not have the supplemental money from the musicians' concerts, the family started to have financial difficulties. The painter became increasingly dependent on alcohol as a means of self-soothing, and he frequently showed up in front of his little daughter looking intoxicated and untidy. Friends of the family started to notice that something was wrong, but the painter and the musician both refused to get any assistance, even when the musician was offered the opportunity to stay for a lengthy period of time at a well-known facility. The moment that pushed the painter over the edge was when critics attacked his most recent work, which was a genuinely terrible piece named Babyface. This was the moment when he lost it. The painter started to think that there were thousands of rats living in the walls of the house, and they were making fun of him and playing jokes on him. The painter would lay out dozens of traps, finally spreading rat poison throughout the house, and even lighting a fire in the attic before better thinking of it and putting it out. Neither the musician nor the daughter ever saw a single rat, but the painter would set out dozens of traps. He would place the responsibility for even the most insignificant problems on the rats, but he would take his anger out on his wife, daughter, dog, and housemaid, who eventually left him because she was fed up with his abuse. The actions of the musician's husband inevitably took an even larger toll on her, even as she was having trouble coming to terms with the damage she had sustained. The musician's years of severe depression took their toll, and when she finally acknowledged the reality that she would never play the instrument again, she decided to end her own life. When the painter discovered the death of his girlfriend in the bathtub, he made an attempt to commit suicide by drowning himself, but was unsuccessful. Shortly after that, Child Protective Services came and took his daughter away. The painter made an attempt to remove his daughter from the facility where she was receiving treatment, but the authorities were able to stop him. Because of his behavior, his friends and colleagues became estranged from him, and they exhausted all their efforts to reason with him before breaking off all communication. After the painter had one of his psychotic episodes and killed the dog, he remained in the empty house all by himself and isolated from the rest of the world. The painter devoted the rest of his life to pursuing the completion of his magnum opus, which is also known as a masterpiece. He even went so far as to dig up the musician's body in order to use it in the painting. He used their skin for the canvas, pulverized their bones into pigment for the paint, and mixed their blood into a primer. He did all this in order to use the musician's body in the picture. The painter finished the work by using a brush made from his daughter's hair, which was the lock the couple had saved after their daughter's first haircut. He also preserved one of the musician's eyes in a jar, so that she might bear witness to what happened. Before the accident, the painter made dozens of attempts to paint a portrait of the musician, all of which were done from memory. He stored each failed painting in a room in the house that was otherwise unoccupied. During this time, he also created a self-portrait, which would be the last of his works to be presented to the public. He would earn a moderate degree of recognition as a result of public interest in the scandalous aspect of his life. The body of the painter was discovered in his home by firefighters who were called to put out a fire there after an undetermined amount of time had passed. The painter, upon realizing his own complicity in the downfall of his family, set fire to the paintings he had created of his wife and then allowed himself to be consumed by the flames. The painter's daughter, from whom he was estranged, was the sole beneficiary of his will, which stipulated that the house and all of its contents were to be left to her along with the property itself. The daughter, now an adult, went back to the house she spent her difficult childhood in so she could try to put her past behind her. There she discovered clues that had been left behind by her father that led her to a hidden room behind her father's studio. It was there that she began painting once more, which drew the attention of the Rat Queen. The public's interest in the family was reignited in 1955 when a biography of the painter named The Masterpiece was published. The book went on to become a bestseller. Within a decade, a movie version of the book was being developed, and it would star one of Hollywood's most brilliant and unusual actors. The author of the book and the actor who played the role were both cursed by the Rat Queen, and their respective ordeals are detailed in later installments of the Layers of Fear series. And that is the story of Layers of Fear. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.